Terrifying AI is going to become one of two things. Either it's going to become a necessity for gracious living, or it's going to destroy us all!
Either way, one thing is clear. Technology such as ChatGPT is already perfectly capable of gathering information to bash some of the most maligned Super Nintendo games of all time. I want to point out that worst is a subjective term, and different people may have different opinions on what makes a game bad. That said, here are 20 games our terrifying chatbot has identified as some of the most horrible ever created. Do you agree with this list? Have a watch and find out. Number 20. In the game Barbie Supermodel, released in 1993, players control Barbie as she travels around the world to participate in a variety of modelling events and photo shoots. The game is a side-scrolling platformer with players controlling Barbie as she runs, jumps and performs various actions to complete each level. The levels are set in various locations around the world such as Paris, New York City and Tokyo. Throughout the game, players must collect various items such as clothing, accessories and cosmetics, which can be used to customize Barbie's appearance. There are criticisms that have been leveled against Barbie Supermodel for the SNES. These include limited and repetitive gameplay, with players often performing the same actions over and over again. The graphics in Barbie Supermodel are considered to be subpar, even for the time. This can detract from the overall gaming experience. Barbie Supermodel did not introduce any significant new features or innovations to the gaming world, making it seem like a generic game designed to capitalize on the popularity of the Barbie brand. It is not considered to be a particularly noteworthy or innovative game by modern standards. Number 19. Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit is a video game that was released in 1994. The game is based on the popular television show Home Improvement and follows the character Tim the Toolman Taylor as he sets out to collect all of the tools he needs for his ultimate tool collection. In the game, players control Tim as he travels through various levels filled with obstacles, enemies and puzzles. The goal of each level is to collect a specific set of tools before advancing to the next level. Along the way, players can use various power tools to fight enemies and overcome obstacles. The game features a variety of different power tools, including saws, drills, hammers and more. Some of the more common criticisms of the game include its repetitive gameplay, simplistic level design and lack of innovation. The game's mechanics are limited and players can quickly become bored with its repetitive nature. Another issue with Home Improvement is that it doesn't do a good job of capturing the essence of the TV show. While the game features characters from the show, it fails to recreate the humour and charm that's made the show so popular. Fans of the show may be disappointed by the game's lack of faithful representation. Number 18. Rise of the Robots is a fighting game that was originally released for various gaming platforms, including the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The game was developed by Mirage Studios and published by Acclaim Entertainment. In the game, the player takes control of a humanoid robot that must fight its way through a series of opponents to reach the game's final boss, the Supervisor. The game features a variety of moves and special attacks that the player can use to defeat their opponents, as well as a 2-player versus mode for multiplayer battles. While the game received a lot of hype prior to its release due to its impressive graphics and animations, it was ultimately criticised for its slow gameplay, limited moveset and lack of overall depth. The game's SNES version received mixed to negative reviews upon release, and some of the criticisms included limited gameplay and poor controls. The controls were often unresponsive, making it difficult to execute moves accurately. The game's difficulty level was often seen as too high, making it frustrating for players to progress. Rise of the Robots was criticised for its lack of innovation and polish, making it a disappointing experience for many players and critics. Number 17. Captain Novolin, released in 1992, was a game developed by Sculptured Software and published by Raya Systems. In Captain Novolin, the player takes on the role of the titular hero Captain Novolin, a diabetic superhero who must navigate through levels and defeat enemies while managing his blood sugar levels. The game was designed to teach players about diabetes and healthy eating habits. Overall, Captain Novolin is a unique game that combines action and education and is notable for its effort to teach players about diabetes and health. One of the main criticisms of the game is its difficulty level, which is considered excessively high. The game's controls are clunky and imprecise, making it difficult to avoid obstacles and enemies. Additionally, the game's educational content, which was intended to teach players about diabetes and healthy eating habits, is often criticised for being simplistic and not particularly informative. Some critics also argue that the game reinforces negative stereotypes about diabetes and perpetuates a sense of shame and stigma around the condition. Captain Novolin is widely regarded as a poorly designed and executed game that failed to meet its educational goals while providing an unenjoyable playing experience. Number 16. Wayne's World is a video game based on the movie of the same name, which was released in 1993 and developed by Grey Matter Inc. and published by THQ. In the game, players control Wayne Campbell or Garth Algar, the two main characters from the movie, as they explore various locations in Aurora, Illinois, and attempt to collect musical instruments for their upcoming concert. Players can use a variety of weapons to defeat enemies such as drumsticks, guitars, and microphones, and can also perform special moves to defeat bosses. Wayne's World for SNES received mixed reviews upon its release, with some critics praising its humour and a variety of levels, while others criticised its repetitive gameplay and difficulty. Wayne's World for SNES was released in 1993 and is considered by many gamers and critics to be a subpar game. The gameplay of Wayne's World is very limited and repetitive. The game involves mostly jumping and attacking enemies with no real variation in the tasks or objectives. The game doesn't bring anything new to the platformer genre and feels like a generic cash grab tie-in to the movie. Overall, Wayne's World is a forgettable experience. Number 15. Super Godzilla is a video game released in 1993. It is a simulation game that allows players to control Godzilla and other kaiju monsters as they battle through different levels. In Super Godzilla, players control Godzilla as he moves through cities, forests, and other environments, battling other monsters and destroying buildings in his path. Players must use a map screen to move Godzilla around the game world and strategically place other monsters in different areas to help him in battle. Despite being released in 1993, the game's graphics were not up to par with other games of the time. The game had limited animation frames and the environments lacked detail. The game's controls were criticised for being unresponsive and awkward, making it difficult for players to control Godzilla and execute moves. The game's user interface was often criticised for being confusing and not providing clear instructions on how to progress through the game. Overall, Super Godzilla was seen as a missed opportunity to create a compelling and enjoyable Godzilla game. While it had some interesting concepts, it ultimately fell short in its execution. Number 14. The Mask, released in 1995, is based on the movie of the same name, which starred Jim Carrey. In the game, players control the main character, Stanley Ipkiss, as he transforms into the zany superhero, The Mask. The game features side-scrolling action and platforming gameplay, as well as some puzzle-solving elements. The game features a lot of repetition in terms of level design and enemies, which make the experience feel monotonous and boring. The game's graphics and gameplay mechanics were considered to be uninspired and derivative, lacking the creativity and charm of the film it was based on. The game's difficulty level was often seen as unfairly high, with some gamers finding it frustratingly difficult to progress through the levels. The Mask may appeal to fans of the film or gamers who enjoy challenging platformers, but it has been widely criticised for its shortcomings. Number 13. Pit Fighter is a 1990 arcade fighting game developed by Atari Games. It was later ported to several home consoles, including the Super Nintendo. In Pit Fighter, players control one of three fighters who compete in underground fighting tournaments. The game features digitized graphics of real-life actors, giving it a unique visual style for its time. Pit Fighter for the SNES failed to live up to the expectations set by the arcade original. The characters are small and lack detail, and the backgrounds are dull and repetitive. The game's gameplay is very basic and repetitive, consisting of only 3 playable characters and a limited moveset. The game lacks depth and variety, and players can easily become bored after a few rounds. The game's difficulty is often cited as a major flaw and can make the game feel more like a chore than a fun experience. It is not aged well and is not considered to be a classic or a must-play game for fans. Number 12. The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends is based on the popular animated TV series of the same name, which aired from 1959 to 1964. In the game, the player controls Rocky the flying squirrel and Bullwinkle the moose as they navigate through various levels, battling enemies and collecting items. The game is a side-scrolling platformer similar to other popular games of the time like Super Mario Bros. And Sonic the Hedgehog. Overall, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends is a fun and light-hearted platformer that fans of the TV series and fans of classic SNES games will enjoy. The game's graphics were criticised for being dull and unappealing, and the game's levels were repetitive and lacked challenge, with many players feeling bored. The game's controls were criticised for being sluggish and unresponsive, making it difficult to execute precise movements or jumps. The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends for SNES was considered a mediocre game that failed to capture the excitement of the cartoon series it was based on. Number 11. Timecop is a side-scrolling action game based on the movie of the same name. In the game, you play as Jack Logan, a time cop who travels through time to stop criminals from changing history. The game features 6 levels, each set in a different time period such as the Wild West and medieval Europe. As Jack, you have a variety of moves and weapons at your disposal, including punches, kicks and guns. The game's levels are very similar to each other and lack variety. The gameplay involves walking around and fighting off enemies, which can quickly become boring. The game's storyline was not well developed and does not follow the plot of the movie very closely. This can be disappointing for fans of the film who were hoping for a faithful adaptation. The game has been reported to have bugs and glitches that can interfere with gameplay or cause the game to crash. While it may have some enjoyable elements, its flaws and lack of variety ultimately make it a forgettable experience. Number 10. Rap Jam Volume 1 is a 1995 video game developed by Motown Games and published by Trade West. The game features a roster of popular rappers from the 1990s, including Queen Latifah, Public Enemy, MC Hammer, and Flavor Flav. The game is a 2-on-2 basketball game where players can choose their favourite rappers as their team and compete against other teams to become the Rap Jam champions. The game also features various hip-hop inspired elements such as breakdancing, graffiti art, and a hip-hop soundtrack. Rap Jam Volume 1 for the SNES is considered a bad game for several reasons. Firstly, the game suffers from poor gameplay mechanics, the controls are clunky, and the game lacks depth and variety in terms of moves and techniques. Secondly, the game's graphics are poor even for the time it was released. The character models are poorly designed and lack detail, and the animations are choppy and inconsistent. Thirdly, the game features only a handful of songs and they are not particularly memorable or well produced. Finally, the game's overall concept and execution are flawed. The idea of combining rap music and basketball may sound appealing, but the game fails to deliver on this promise. Number 9. Super Noah's Ark 3D is a video game developed by Wisdom Tree and in 1994. The game is a first-person shooter with a biblical theme where the player takes on the role of Noah and must collect various animals and feed them in order to progress through the levels. The game was unique in that it used the engine of another popular first-person shooter, Wolfenstein 3D, but with the violence replaced by non-lethal means, such as a slingshot that fired food pellets. This was due to Nintendo's policy at the time of not allowing violent or graphic content in their games. One of the major issues with Super Noah's Ark 3D is its unresponsive controls, which can make it difficult to navigate through the game's levels and shoot enemies accurately. The graphics are also relatively low quality compared to other SNES games of the time, with blurry textures and simplistic character models. Another major complaint about the game is its lack of originality. Many players have pointed out that it is essentially just a reskin of Wolfenstein 3D, with few significant gameplay changes or innovations. Super Noah's Ark 3D is unremarkable, with little to offer beyond its novelty value as a religious-themed shooter. Number 8. Family Dog is a video game that was released in 1993. It is based on the American animated sitcom Family Dog that aired on CBS from 1993 to 1994. In the game, the player controls the titular family dog as he navigates through a suburban neighbourhood filled with obstacles and enemies. The game is a side-scrolling platformer and the player must jump, dodge and attack to progress through each level. The game features 6 levels, each with a unique theme and a set of enemies. The game features very repetitive gameplay, with players needing to navigate the dog through levels that all look and feel the same. The game's controls are difficult to use, which makes it frustrating to play, and its lack of variety can make it feel dull. While it may appeal to fans of the show, it is not recommended for those looking for an engaging or enjoyable gaming experience. Number 7. Revolution X is a first-person shooter arcade game developed and released by Midway Games in 1994. The game was later ported to various home consoles, including the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. In Revolution X, the player takes on the role of a member of a resistance group fighting against a tyrannical government known as the New Order Nation. The game's objective is to rescue captured hostages and take down the New Order Nation's leader, Helga, while dodging enemy fire and avoiding obstacles. The SNES version of Revolution X had poor graphics compared to other games of its time, making it unappealing to many gamers. The SNES controller had limited controls, which made it difficult to control the game, especially during fast-paced action scenes. The game's aiming system was also considered to be inaccurate, making it difficult to hit targets accurately. Overall, these factors contributed to the game's negative reception, making it a less desirable choice for SNES players. Number 6. Street Hockey 95 is a video game developed by Unexpected Development and published by DTMC. The game allows players to select one of several international teams and compete in street hockey games. The gameplay is similar to traditional hockey games, but with a few key differences. The game is played on a street court rather than on an ice rink, and there are no penalties for checking or fighting. Players can also perform special moves such as spin moves and shots from behind the back. One of the main complaints about the game is its lack of depth and variety. While the game does feature multiple game modes, including exhibition, playoffs and skills competitions, the gameplay itself can become repetitive and predictable. Some reviewers noted that the controls in Street Hockey 95 can be difficult to master, and the game sometimes are feeling difficult to control. This can lead to frustration for players who are trying to execute specific moves or strategies on the ice. Street Hockey 95 lacks the depth and polish of other titles in the genre. Number 5. Ultraman Towards the Future is a side-scrolling action game developed by BEC and released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991. The game is based on the Ultraman Towards the Future television series, which aired in Australia and Japan in the early 1990s. In Ultraman Towards the Future, players control Ultraman, a giant superhero who must save the city from various kaiju monsters. The game consists of 6 stages, each with a boss battle against a different kaiju. Ultraman can use a variety of attacks, including punches, kicks, and special beam attacks. Ultraman was not widely known outside of Japan and Australia, and is considered a somewhat obscure title in the SNES library. The game's controls were considered to be of low quality, making it difficult for players to maneuver Ultraman effectively. The game was considered to be shallow, with little to no backstory or character development. This made it difficult for players to become invested in the game or its characters. The game was notoriously difficult, with some levels being almost impossible to complete without cheating. This made the game frustrating for many players. Ultraman was not well received by critics or gamers, and is considered to be one of the worst Super Nintendo games ever released. Number 4. Bebe's Kids is based on the animated movie of the same name. In the game, the player controls the character of Robin Harris, who has been tasked with taking Bebe's kids to Fun World amusement park. The game is a side-scrolling platformer, and the player must guide Robin through a series of levels filled with obstacles and enemies. Along the way, the player can collect power-ups and items that will help them progress through the game. One of the main criticisms of Bebe's Kids for SNES is its poor gameplay mechanics. Many reviewers have noted that the controls are terrible, which makes it difficult to maneuver the main character through the game's levels. The game also lacks variety and is uninteresting. The visuals are simplistic and unimpressive, with uninspired level designs and dull character animations. The sound effects and music are also considered weak, with repetitive and annoying sound effects and forgettable music. The game's lack of checkpoints and limited lives also make it frustrating to play, as dying means starting over from the beginning of the level. Bebe's Kids is considered a poorly designed and executed game that fails to deliver. Number 3. Lester the Unlikely is a platformer game developed by Visual Concepts and released in 1994. The game follows the story of Lester, a meek and timid teenager who gets stranded on a desert island after a cruise ship he was on sinks. Throughout, the game players control Lester as he navigates through various levels filled with obstacles and enemies, using his limited combat abilities to defeat enemies and progress through the game's story. Lester the Unlikely is widely considered to be a poor game for the SNES. Some of the main criticisms of the game include the game's controls, unfair difficulty, repetitiveness, poor graphics, and sound. While some players may find enjoyment in its challenging gameplay and quirky premise, it is generally not considered to be good. Number 2. Beethoven's Second is a video game based on the 1993 family comedy film of the same name. It was developed by Rydell Software Productions and published by High Tech Expressions in 1994. In the game, players control the character of Beethoven, the lovable Saint Bernard dog, as he embarks on various adventures through different levels. The objective of each level is to collect a certain number of bones while avoiding obstacles such as cats, skunks, and other hazards. The game received generally negative reviews for its poor gameplay mechanics, unresponsive controls, repetitive music, and lack of originality. Critics also noted that the game was a poor adaptation of the movie and did not capture the charm and humour of the film. Additionally, the game was criticised for being too short and too easy, with little replay value. The graphics were also considered to be mediocre, with bland backgrounds and uninteresting character designs. Beethoven's Second is generally considered to be a poor quality game. Number 1. Shaq Fu is a 2D fighting game that was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1994. The game was developed by Delphine Software International and published by Electronic Arts. The game features basketball superstar Shaquille O'Neal as the main character who travels to another dimension to rescue a young boy from an evil sorcerer. The gameplay is similar to other 2D fighting games of the time, such as Street Fighter 2, with players using a variety of attacks and special moves to defeat their opponents. Despite the high-profile endorsement from Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq Fu was largely panned by critics and gamers alike. The game was criticised for its poor controls, unresponsive gameplay, and lack of depth. The game has a limited number of moves and combos, which makes it repetitive and boring to play. The game's difficulty is unbalanced, with some fights being too easy and others being frustratingly difficult. The graphics in Shaq Fu are unimpressive, with poor character designs and uninspired backgrounds. Once you've beaten the game, there's little reason to go back and play it again, as there are no alternate endings or unlockable content. Overall, Shaq Fu is considered a disappointment, especially given the hype surrounding it at the time of its release. While it has gained a cult following over the years, it remains a prime example of a poorly executed licensed game. So that was the top 20 worst Super Nintendo games according to ChatGPT. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of this list and whether these games deserve the hate that the chatbot had identified they had received. If you like futuristic content, subscribe and check out my video on the mysterious illegal Star Trek console now.